Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, Assistant Dean for External Relations at the Indiana University Lilly Family School Philanthropy. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Sara Konrath. Sara teaches courses for us, conducts primary research, and also serves as co-director of our doctoral program. And Dr. Konrath, thanks so much for being with us. And as we explore your work here at the Lilly Family School Philanthropy, I just want to start out with curiosity on how you reached this point in your career. Was there an epiphany moment where you decided to study psychology and apply psychology to philanthropic studies? Did this evolve over time? How was this interest sparked in your professional career?
It was a slower process and that evolved over time. As an undergrad, I actually got into a math and business program and also psychology. And I ended up making the choice to go into psychology because at the time I thought it was therapy and I wanted to help people. I thought it would help people. And I remember my first psych class, I realized that it was research and science. And I was like, that's great. And I realized that that could also help people. And so I started working in a research lab in my second year of undergrad. And that's pretty much when I realized this was a really good fit for me to do research. And in terms of studying the topics, it was oftentimes you just work with the people who are around you. And I had really good mentors all along. And it just started evolving that I was working with people who had some interest in the self and in how we relate to others. And over time, this became an interest in narcissism and then empathy.
Dr. Konrath, how did that then become applied to philanthropic studies? Psychology could deal with all sorts of areas of human development and all different age stages and times of life, and your work led you into philanthropic studies. How did that happen?
Well, actually, psychology, a lot of psychology does study things like why we help each other and how we help each other. We call it pro-social behavior. And this includes things like giving money to others, volunteering, just helping strangers, even caring for family members and friends. And one of the things that I'm interested in is not just what we do, so how we help and the times that we choose to make those decisions, but what motivates those decisions and whether the motive because we care and because of compassion, or even when sometimes we are motivated to help because somehow we benefit personally.
In the world of fundraising, and I also serve as director of the fundraising school, we talk about donor motivation, and different donors can be doing the exact same thing, but for different motivations. How does your work? Can you unpack that a little bit more, please, in terms of how psychology can help us understand those different motivations about why somebody volunteers or why somebody donates?
Well, a lot of times psychologists actually just ask people why they do it, and we just listen to what they say. Now we do it in a certain way. We use numbers, so we develop scales, like measures, like little quizzes that people can take to figure out what is motivating their behavior. And along with my colleague Famita Handy, we developed a scale called the Motives to Donate scale, where we have figured out 6 different key motivations that people have for giving to nonprofits.
And what do you find? Is it useful? Can a nonprofit use that with their donors? Does it help them with their fundraising? How have you seen that play out now that that scale's in place?
Well, that scale is still newly published, so we're hoping that nonprofits will use it. I do think there's some usefulness in terms of, having a tool to use to either directly work with donors and have them fill out the form and take the quiz and see where they stand, or even just to know that these are sort of a spectrum of motivations, and when you're interacting with donors, that here's a bunch of things that matter to them, and here's how you can talk to them.
Now, in one of your first replies, you utilized a word that not everybody might typically associate with philanthropic behavior, charitable behavior, and that was narcissism. And this is an area that you studied and have even written about. For example, a well-regarded Wall Street Journal op-ed on how to fundraise from a narcissist. Help us understand your interest in narcissism, what you're learning, and how do we see what could be a counterintuitive word? How does that apply to philanthropy?
Well, as we've been saying, any behavior has different motivations. And actually my dissertation work, my Ph.D. work, was on narcissism. So I came into studying these topics from that perspective. And eventually I was like, okay, I'd like to see the other side of it. It's a little more pleasant. But yes, narcissistic people, they do give as well. And in our research, we find that You can't tell if someone's narcissistic, if they're giving money or if they're volunteering. So people who give money or volunteer are just as narcissistic as people who don't. So that's interesting because I think it's not what we expect when we think about giving. But actually, the motivations differ, and the ways that narcissistic people give are different. Obviously, narcissistic people give because there's some motivation, there's something in it for themselves. And that isn't necessarily like always a direct, like getting a gift back or something that's obvious, but it could be something like they're getting attention or their name is recognized or something like that. And those things are important in narcissistic people.
Dr. Konrath, we're discussing these topics from the standpoint of the donor and from the volunteer. How does psychology then fit in for the person leading the nonprofit organization, managing the volunteer department, leading the fundraising effort to discern those motivations? How does psychology figure into that work? And then I'm thinking specifically about our students who come to learn and be enriched, but also be in professional development. How does your work apply in that regard?
Well, I think the research I've been doing on empathy can be really useful for these people. So just having leadership in nonprofits who develop their own capacity for empathy, which is being able to read people, understand their motivations, understand how their life experiences might affect them, and also feel care and compassion and be motivated to help them. Having that skill set is really valuable when it comes to leading people, whether it's your volunteer managers, or even whether it's leading with your donors in a collaborative way to help guide them and collaboratively figure out what would be a good gift for your organization.
I always enjoy watching you present, and I've had a chance to do that on more than one occasion, not just because I learned something new from you each and every time, but the way in which you present. And I want to ask you, when you're putting together a PowerPoint presentation, when you're putting together a presentation overall, I just have to commend you. There's a light touch, the art that you use, the graphics that you use. I would just describe you trying to have a little bit of fun, and you're demystifying what can be really dense and complicated. You have an international reputation for a deep level of expertise, and you're making your knowledge so accessible to a broad audience. Can you describe that a little bit when you're sitting down with that blank PowerPoint slide, what you're trying to accomplish to make this information so accessible and useful?
Thank you. It's very kind of you to say that. And I think the first feeling when I have that blank slide is terror. But when it comes down to it, I realize that when I'm speaking to audiences that don't have PhDs, but who are very accomplished and smart, I don't want them to feel terror when I have a slide up. Actually, I want it to be a conversation and a collaborative experience. And so even though I'm the one who maybe is there as an expert on a specific topic, I always make these slides with breathing room and room for conversation, room to hear from the people in the audience or in the group what their perspectives are and how we could together come up with something that is actually going to be useful for their life in their experience. So I really do try very hard to do that when I teach or when I'm giving any presentation. And when I do that, I actually end up learning too. So it's part of the fun for me. So it's not always, I think, a traditional lecture style.
No, not at all. Not at all. Very engaging and again, very accessible. Dr. Konrath, as we talk about these areas of expertise in your research, how do they then inform your teaching? Do you do an individual course on each of these topics? Do these topics kind of filter their way into all of their courses? Help our audience understand how this informs your teaching for our school.
Well, I teach a course called The Psychology of Giving. So this is a really fun course in which I can directly talk about some of the research I do and also some other research in psychology in all different areas. We even talk about the biology of giving. So we talk about how animals can be pro-social and have empathy, which is a very fun topic. So yes, I do get to talk about this stuff directly in that course, but I also teach a course on research methods. So that's teaching people how to design studies and how to run experiments. And in that case, it's not necessarily about the content, but it's about the sort of recipe. How do you actually do this thing? How do you ask a research question, and why is it important to do that? And overall, what's important to me when teaching is it's not just about content, but it's about having students ask a lot of questions and be skeptical and learn to critically think about research, because we see so much research in the news and all these headlines. but I want them to feel empowered to actually look at the headlines and understand how to interpret them, and that actually there's a behind the scenes that happens when you see a research headline. There's been years of research before that, and that there's typically we have debates about results of research. We're not always pretty black and white about it. So I just want to give them a set of tools that they can use to question the scientific method and to question what they're seeing out there. And then secondly, to apply the work to their own life and perhaps their nonprofit organization or their whatever they're doing in their life.
That wonderful description really points to the distinctive of our academic programs at the Indiana University Lilly Family School Philanthropy. As you hear Dr. Konrath and watch this interview, you see that we're not teaching the how of nonprofit management. As important as that is, we need wonderful nonprofit managers in their programs that teach that. But Dr. Konrath, as we listen to your wonderful explanations, you're asking difficult questions. You're presenting complex information. You're helping our students understand the what and the why. When you say you're teaching them critical thinking, we're not necessarily giving them answers. Right. We're helping them ask questions and approach questions. Can you talk about, and again, you're a leader in our academic programs as co-director of our doctoral program. Can you just describe, how that fits into the overall strategy of our degree programs?
Well, for our degree programs, or particularly the Ph.D., one of the things we're doing is we do treat it like a conversation too. This is an important value of just having back and forth conversations, but we want our students to come in and at the first stage to listen to what is the conversation happening with their topic. So reading papers, going to conferences, understanding what is out there right now, say about motivations for giving or whatever their topic is. And then over time, we want them to understand that they too have something to say in this conversation. And that's what their research is. So their research is actually part of a longer conversation in which people have been asking these types of questions for a really long time in different ways. And they can bring something to the table and be part of this. I think that's how it is with PhD students. With undergrads, they're not going to be producing research necessarily, but they are going to be sometimes reading it and they're going to be responding to it. And one thing that I do with them is actually just do interactive activities so they can experience what it might be like. The research kind of comes alive. So one example is in my psychology of giving class, I have a unit on the joy of giving. So all this research showing that when we give, it can make us happier. There are some health outcomes associated with giving, better health. And so then I'm like, okay, this is nice. We're reading about it. We all have this feeling like, yes, giving makes you happy. Why don't we go out into the world and run little experiments on ourselves and see what happens to ourselves when we're giving or when we're receiving? So we actually have these interactive demonstrations going out there into the world, giving somebody, something tangible, like somebody who's in need, some money, or paying for someone's coffee, who's behind you in line. These little things, how does that make you feel? Well, what if you're in need and you're asking for help? How does that make you feel? So just showing them like this research is actually real. And also sometimes it's more complicated. So maybe they don't feel the way we thought based on the research.
What a wonderful description showing the breadth of instruction that we have at our university and at our college, where at the doctoral level, Dr. Konrath is teaching students how to conduct primary research. At the undergraduate level, she's exposing them to that research and helping them experience that as part of their learning journey through the Lilly Family School Philanthropy. And Dr. Konrath, if I could ask you to expand, the chapter in our textbook on fundraising, and again, at the School of Philanthropy, we cover all aspects of philanthropic behavior. It could be volunteering, could be advocacy, could be using your relationships. Yes, it can be donating money. But Dr. Konrath's chapter is the joy of giving. And I know another area that you spent a lot of time on are the mental health and physical health benefits associated, especially with volunteering, but also charitable giving, including that we can live longer. Help us understand that, please.
Yes, we have done research on in which we follow older adults over time, and we measure their giving behaviors at one time, and then later on, we have access to mortality records. So this is part of a larger study called the Wisconsin Longitudinal Study, and we are able to just figure out what's the implication of giving. You're giving at one point in your life, a few years later, how does this affect your longevity? And we find that volunteers, people who volunteer are less likely to die 7 years later, and also that the motivations that the reasons that they help really matter. And people who are volunteering because they care, whether they care about people and their own loved ones, or whether they care about the cause, those are the people who actually benefit from volunteering. But the people who are volunteering in order to receive something, and it could be something good, like learning something new, which is great. But when you're volunteering for that reason, you don't experience a health effect, a health benefit. So it's just interesting. We also had another paper where we tracked people over time, and we said, well, okay, here's a type, many different types of giving. Which types of giving seem to be best for health? And actually, we find it's when people are giving their time. And we're not sure exactly why. It's a new paper that recently came out. But we did find that it seems to be the most beneficial to we think it's part about giving like a part of yourself that matters. And when you're volunteering, by the nature of doing that, you're often thinking through, you're standing there, you're actually physically there, you're looking people in the eyes, and it's hard not to give yourself. Whereas when you're giving money, you can do it in a distant way. So I would say we don't know yet. We'd like to do more research, but I would guess that people who are giving money in a more involved way, and because they feel a lot of compassion and they're actually super engaged, I would assume there'd be some benefits, but that's for future research.
Yeah, and that research continues at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, thanks to very talented faculty members, professors like Dr. Sara Konrath. And Dr. Konrath, you have discussed this already throughout this conversation, but if you could summarize, please, what does success look like for you with our students, whether it's in the classroom at any of the 3 degree levels in which you serve, or at outside the classroom at other academic events and engagements, or maybe even when folks are alumni and they now are researchers or professors, or maybe out in the nonprofit sector at a nonprofit organization. What does success look like for you as you serve our students?
To me, my definition of success is overlap with my students' definition of success. So my job as a professor is to get to know my students and listen to them and figure out what their life goals are and where they're at on their journey, and to help develop and mentor them through that. And oftentimes I see students start with one goal and move to another over time, and that's fine. I try really hard not to impose my own life path on them. Like, I want to be a professor. I've always been a nerdy kind of person, that's fine. But not everybody wants to, look at a bunch of numbers every day for the rest of their life. It really is my favorite thing. But, I understand that there's other people in the world with other desires and dreams and passions. And my job is to really facilitate that, to open up doors, to listen, to figure out what kind of training they're going to need. And when it comes to, speaking with a group of people who I might not see again, my job is to, again, listen and then figure out, based on listening, what do they need right now? And how is this helping them in terms of, like, they're here for a reason. How does me being here with them give them value in some way? So those are the kind of things that I think about when I interact with students, whether they're students from the fundraising school or whether they're students who are in our academic programs.
At the start of our conversation, you talked about the importance of mentors in your journey. How fulfilling is it for you now that you are able to mentor others?
It's the most fulfilling part of my job. I really love it. For me, just seeing my students succeed, seeing them get publications in research journals or whatever they want to be doing, it makes me very happy, and I'm so proud. This is a time of year where students are finishing up for the year and we're looking at their progress, and it's a very good time of year for professors.
Dr. Sara Konrath, faculty member at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, where she co-directs our school's doctorate program and also is engaged in primary research, as well as in teaching our students in our master's and bachelor degree programs as well. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz.